Welcome to Strong and Heard training and our short introduction to 4 of the courses that we currently run as virtual training events. These courses are for export entries, import entries on the Chief computer system. For beginners, we have how to complete export entries and how to complete import entries. And for those of you that have already used the Chief system and have a working knowledge of the Tariff, we have Chief exports and Chief imports. So if you're a beginner and you haven't used the Chief system before, you haven't completed a customs declaration before, the 2 export entry and import entry courses, those are the courses for you. If you have some experience of Chief and customs declarations, then perhaps the morning course, Chief Exports or Chief Imports, would be the more appropriate course. So who can make customs declarations? Well, basically anybody can, but customs do say that anyone wanting to complete customs declarations must have a good working knowledge of all 3 volumes of the customs tariff. You'll find those volumes on gov.uk, and you really oughtn't to attempt a customs entry without first consulting these documents. Very important to understand what is required on an export and import customs declaration. It's not just filling a form in, it's about what goes in these boxes on the customs declaration. And our courses, all 4 of them, will guide you through that process. And who is responsible for these customs declarations now that you've embarked upon this process? Well, the exporter and the importer are always responsible. That goes without saying. But if you're a customs broker or a freight forwarder embarking upon a career in customs declarations, you would want to act in a direct capacity if you didn't want to be responsible for the actual declaration. You need to be authorized to act in a direct capacity, but you would not be responsible for the declaration. However, if you operate in an indirect capacity, then you will be jointly responsible for the customs declaration, and that at import includes the customs debt. We say there are 8 pieces of information in our courses that relate to the 50+ boxes that are on a single administrative declaration or document, or customs declaration if you like. And we categorize them as follows. We have the who, the what, the where, the why, the how much, the legality, and whether the goods are packed in drums or containers or cartons or pallets, and so on and so forth. We need to know the exporter, the importer, the agent, the customer. We need to know what we're sending, what we're bringing in. We need to know where we're sending it to and where we're bringing it in from. We need to know why we're bringing it in, why we're exporting it. And we need to know how the goods are moving, by air, by sea, by truck. All of this information goes on a customs declaration, as does the value. And the value is very important, absolutely crucial at import, because at import it's about duty and VAT. And of course it's about export control and import control. Do my goods need a license or some form of certificate or permit? And how are my goods packed and what do they weigh? All of this information is required on a customs declaration, and all of this information is dealt with in our 4 courses. So how do they know who we are when we make a customs declaration? Well, we have a thing called an EORI number, Economic Operator Registration and Identification Number. And the courses will talk you through how to create this number, where to get this number from, and where to put it on a customs declaration. Now that they know who we are, how do they know what it is that we're bringing into the United Kingdom? How do they know what it is that we're sending out of the United Kingdom? And in the United Kingdom, we use the unique consignment reference number at exports and the unique consignment number at imports. And our course will talk you through these reference numbers, how they are constructed and where they are placed in the customs declaration. And how do they know if we've paid our VAT? How do they know if we've paid our duty? At import, of course. And they know it because sat behind your EORI number is a VAT number if you're VAT registered. And the chief system knows that. And how do you get the money to customs? You either have a deferment account number or you use the flexible accounting system. And our courses explain the difference between the two. Looking at the deferment account number, or DAN, as the trade like to call it, or the flexible accounting system, also known as the FAS. These are the two methods of payment that Revenue and Customs will accept. And there is a place for these details on an import customs declaration, and we take you through that in the course. And while we're talking about imports and paying duty, we need to just look briefly at valuation, because valuation at import is all about the money, and it's all about the correct amount of money. And our Chief Imports course, our How to Complete Import Entries course, will explain valuation to you and where the details go on a customs declaration. So do we still use paper forms? Well, of course, the straight answer is no. We don't use paper forms anymore. It's all electronic. It's based on the paper form, the single administrative document. But we submit our declarations electronically to Chief. At exports, we have a web channel. We call it the Cheap and Cheerful channel. It's a very simple process to make an online declaration to the national export system. But the system doesn't retain any data. And an exporter or a customs broker completing customs entries might like to use that system because of its the fact that it's free. But for most of us, and of course there's no copy facility either on that system, but for most of us, we will either use the email channel or the XML channel at export, and we have to have our own software, or we'll use the CSP channel at import, and we must have a badge. And we go through these methods of declaration to Chief. We talk about them in our presentations, we talk about them in the courses, and all will be explained to you. Of course, at imports, the Chief badge itself, which you have to purchase, is mandatory. For exports, one doesn't need a Chief badge, but nevertheless, software is still required in either case to be able to complete customs declarations. So what do they look like? This is an electronic export entry. It's also known as an EAD, or an export accompanying document, and we will look at this closely in our courses. We'll explain about the boxes and where the information goes and how it relates to the export declaration. And this document is an electronic import entry. It's a Trader Import Plain Paper C88 to give it its correct name. And again, in our import courses, we explain all the boxes, where they go, what goes in them, and how they're completed, both in the How to Imports course and in the Chief Imports course. We briefly talk about the law. Things are changing next year, but we're still under the Union Customs Code. We still use the UK tariff, and we'll use both those pieces of information even after Brexit. But things will start to change in 2021. Currently, we're under the Union Customs Code, and part of the course is explaining how that relates to customs declarations. So what is Chief? Well, it's the customs handling of import and export freight that has been with us for a very long time. It's a very stable system, and it processes all our customs declarations for all our goods, whether they're moved by land, by sea, or by air. And Chief allows importers, exporters, agents, customs brokers to complete customs declarations electronically. And our current Chief system processes 70 million customs declarations each and every year. And with Brexit just around the corner, 355 million entries will be processed by Chief from January 2021. Chief validates the information as we input it. If the information isn't correct, Chief will reject it. So what is the tariff? The UK tariff that we talked about earlier on. We look at the tariff, we look up commodity codes, it's all part of the course, and we see what sort of measures sit against commodity codes, whether we need a license, a certificate, or a permit. So the measures relating to commodity codes live in the tariff, and as part of the courses we look at particular commodity codes and work out whether we require a license to be declared on our customs declaration or not. And here is an example, a screenshot from the tariff. This is an export commodity code that we can see requires an export license for dual use goods. The courses show you exactly how to declare this document on an export declaration, and we do the same for import declarations. And we talk about customs procedure codes, SAD box 37. Very crucial part of the export declaration process. These are 7-character numbers. As a customs broker, as a freight forwarder, as an exporter, as an importer who has a working knowledge of all 3 volumes of the customs tariff, you should be able to identify the correct customs procedure code for the import or export customs declaration that you're about to prepare. Here we see examples of key export codes, how they start. A customs procedure code, a CPC starting with a 10, is a standard export. One starting with 21 is a temporary export for processing. A CPC starting with 23 is a temporary export for exhibition. And a CPC starting 31 is for a re-export of goods that were imported under a special procedure. And we have the key import codes here. We have 40, which is a standard import of goods into home use and free circulation. We have a code starting with 51 for special procedures. These goods are not in free circulation. If we want to bring something into temporary admission, where we're not processing the goods, then 53 is the beginning of our CPC. And if we're bringing some goods back that we send out of the United Kingdom on a temporary basis, we can bring them back with CPC 61 series. And then finally, if we're going to bring goods into a customs warehouse, we use CPC code starting 71. And here is an example of our invoice that we use when we're completing the customs declarations, and we illustrate this by putting the box numbers on the invoice. These are the SAD box numbers that will relate to the customs declaration. And we walk you through an export entry. We go through all the headers and all the items of the customs declaration from start to finish, explaining in great detail each data element, each SAD box as we come across it. And of course we do the same for our import entries. Again, a guided walk through an import entry, going through all the various box numbers. Here is an example of a software screenshot, package marks and numbers, SAD box 31. And during the course we go through all of these things in fine detail, and here we have an example of box 31 being complete. And we look at value build-up. It's not just about the price you pay for the goods, it's not just about the cost, it's also about the freight and the insurance that must be applied to arrive at the landing value. And we go through value build-up on an import declaration in great detail, enabling you to make sure that your customs declaration is completed correctly. Here is a goods departure message. It's known as a DTIS-8. We're back to exports, our export courses now. And if you are going to complete customs declarations, then it's not just about the declaration. It's also about making sure that that declaration is arrived at the port or airport, that the declaration is processed by customs, and that the declaration is departed on the chief system when the goods leave the United Kingdom. And that's all part and parcel of the How to Complete Export Entries course and the Chief Exports course. A very important part of the customs declaration process. And of course, it wouldn't be fair to just talk about customs declarations if we didn't put them into the context of the actual processes themselves. What happens to a customs declaration? So we look at the export process from pre-lodgement through to goods arrival and presentation to customs, through customs processing, permission to progress, and finally departure on the vessel, truck or aircraft. All an integral and important part of the export declaration process. And we do the same for imports. We look at the actual declaration being pre-lodged to chief and being validated and placed on hold by chief. We look at what happens when the vessel or the aircraft or the truck arrives here in the United Kingdom and goods are discharged and presented to customs. We talk about what happens at the processing stage, what additional documentation might be required with your customs declaration. Will you have a declaration? Will you have your goods examined by UK Border Force? And we look at all of that in our courses. We talk about how duty is paid, how duty is secured, and how eventually we obtain customs clearance. We talk about amending declarations. What happens if you get it wrong? Can you amend the declaration on chief? Well, the straight answer is no. You have to do what's known as a post-clearance amendment. And the courses that we run will talk you through that process. And finally, it's all about getting it right. It's important to be compliant. It's important to take customs declarations serious. As I said earlier on in this short presentation, it's not just about putting numbers and letters in boxes. It's not just about form filling. It's about having a good working knowledge of all 3 volumes of the customs tariff. And with that knowledge, you can complete customs declarations. If you get it wrong, you could incur the wrath of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. You could end up with a civil penalty. That's the minimum per offence. That's the maximum per offence. And don't forget, there are 50 plus boxes on a customs declaration. Every one of them needs to be completed absolutely correctly. If you don't, you may have a civil penalty. Customs, of course, listen to reasonable excuses. Customs, of course, listen to mitigating circumstances. They send warning letters out. But at the end of the day, if you're not compliant, life can be difficult in the customs declaration process. So thank you for listening to this short introduction to our 4 courses. You will at the end of the course, whether it's the Chief Exports, Chief Imports or the How-To courses, you will receive an assessment form by email, and we do encourage delegates to complete those forms for us. If you want to make a booking for any of these courses, then by all means go to www.strongandheard.co.uk. All of the courses are up there. We're running virtual courses at the moment due to the situation with COVID-19, but we expect to be running face-to-face courses again very shortly. But whether you want a virtual course or a face-to-face course, the information and the training details are all on our website. Or if you'd prefer, you'd like to talk to us about your training requirements, then of course you can call us on 0161 499 7000. Thank you very much for listening.